Hey art nerds, so if there is one thing I've noticed, it's that us Americans love a redemption art. You can be just total garbage, but if you have that redemption art, people will act like you were more than a saint the entire time. And I think that's what makes the Art Supply Redemption series so much fun, is it's a chance for art supplies that I initially dismissed to redeem themselves, either as my skill and knowledge increase or as the company has had time to evolve. Today, we have a redemption story maybe for you guys, because we're taking a look at two SeamiArt products. We're taking a look at their professional palette, and we are taking a look at their very cute travel palette. And even though I really did not like my first experiences with SeamiArt, I kept seeing other artists on YouTube and on TikTok using SeamiArt watercolors, and I thought, surely I'm just missing something. So I decided to give them another chance, and I'm really excited to share this with you guys today. So we're going to be taking a look at both the travel palette as well as the professional palette. We're going to be talking about comparable watercolors, and we're even going to take a look at the original palette. So if you guys are ready for a possible tale of redemption, tune in and let's talk about SeamiArt watercolors. I know I keep saying this and it keeps not happening, but y'all, we are actually nearing the end of the student grade showdown. And I figured what better way to kind of reach the end. I think I've got like maybe one more palette left to do that I'm classifying as student grade, and it's a Maritini palette, so I'm actually not sure. But I figured, why not offer a brand some possible art supply redemption? So way at the start of our student grade showdown, I reviewed this 96 color SeamiArt palette. Really did not like it. I see people use this palette on YouTube from time to time to paint beautiful art. I don't know how they're doing it. This palette, I think I got it from Amazon, but I may have gotten it from AliExpress. But these two palettes here are not only from AliExpress, they are from the SeamiArt store. So if there was a chance that I'd gotten a knockoff, and hey, that does happen from time to time, this should be no chance at all. So we're taking a look at a travel palette by SeamiArt, as well as at their professional watercolor palette today. All right, so I purchased these in October of 2022. Oh, duh, that's just last October. Man, it feels like it's been a year, and it's just March. For both of these, I paid $57.59. I ordered them from the SeamiArt Painting Materials store. So we're going to click the first one. So this is the SeamiArt 26 colors full pan artist grade professional solid watercolor tin box paint set for school art painting supplies. I did not get the empty tin. I got the tin that comes with the paints, but you do have the option of just getting the pans themselves, the empty tin if you happen to like this format. And it looks kind of like this. They're probably promising us larger, so they're not really full pans, but they're also not half pans. These are going to be weird. I can feel it in my waters. So they were made in China. They are solid watercolors. They're talking about color lump capacity. Oh, I guess that's how much paint is in each pan. So about 3.6 milliliters. This is a 26 color set. It also comes with a travel paintbrush, as well as a one-piece tin box with plastic tray. So I don't know if this is actually iron. I guess we could find out if it is ferromagnetic when we switch back over to the desk cam, but it is an enameled tin, and you could slot this tin underneath if you want to. It looks like here it comes with like a pretty standard little travel brush, not a water brush or like the world's cheapest brush ever. They also look like they come already wrapped. And then here are the colors in the 26-piece set. So we have lemon yellow, mid yellow, yellow ochre, orange, red, fuchsia, grass green, olive green, tree green, burnt umber, reddish brown, pale purple, lake green, ultramarine, indigo, black, Payne's gray, Prussian blue, dark brown, cherry red, dark red, lilac, dark purple, dark green, Indian red, and peach pink. And then we have the colors here again. And again, hopefully they actually label them on the pans themselves. And that's about it. So the other thing we ordered is this. So this is the SeamiArt 12 Basic Colors Watercolor, solid watercolor set with transparent acrylic box and portable painting brush art supplies. And I didn't order the empty acrylic box. In fact, I don't even know if the empty acrylic box was an option. Seeing a lot of this kind of stuff though on Etsy. And if you shop on AliExpress long enough, then you sure recognize when you see it on Etsy. But I like probably people who sell on Etsy do have a problem with this because these aren't handmade by individuals. These are bulk made in a factory somewhere. I think this might be the set I went with, but knowing me and being cheap, this might have been the set I went with. We will find out. We will discover that together. But if we went with the smaller set, it comes with 12 basic colors with transparent acrylic box basis set, packaging bag plus instructions and color cards, screwdriver plus number 6 portable painting brush, color testing paper, 12 basic colors with transparent acrylic box. So they've actually listed the colors a couple of times. And oh, look how promising these look. Look, y'all, if there's one thing I've learned from reviewing AliExpress stuff, this was probably not painted with that. Also found out, so I have a theory. So Potentate makes markers. They and Superior are often, I kind of feel like they might be made by the same manufacturer, the same company. It's hard to say exactly, but they're definitely connected. So where does SeamiArt, man, one of these days I'm going to have to do a Charlie Day image board and just like go wild with all this OEM / ODM manufacturing and repackaging and rebranding and renaming, because I like Superior. I don't necessarily like SeamiArt, but they are recommending, and this is the SeamiArt material store, that we use the Potentate watercolor drawing notebook. I thought when I ordered this, it came with one. Maybe I'm misremembering. I don't know. Anyway, 1-piece empty acrylic box. Only 1-piece empty acrylic box can use to separate the tube paints. The lid can be a palette DIY to travel paint set. And then okay, so these are the different, it's not the content for the whole thing, it's the different sets. So if you order just this, you get just that. If you get the gift set, it comes with a storage bag and a portable screwdriver. If you order this, you get 12 high quality basic solid watercolor colors. Unique transparent acrylic box can mix on the lid or 3 blank, wow, well, that's a tongue twister, or 3 blank blocks. Number 6 painting brush with nylon hair. Portable, can be used for hook line or color filling. I think when they say hook line, I'm thinking of inking or color filling. I think that's proprietary, but propriety package bag, instruction and color testing card. And then if you do the gift set, you also get a journal, watercolor pad, a white highlight pen, and a line drawing pin. And it promises better color quality, more exquisite package. And if you guys have hung around the channel long enough, you know any promises you make are promises I will hold against you. So this is the box. This is the set. What a set. You get a very cheap looking bag and a little bitty screwdriver and some bolts. This is the actual watercolor set. So you get watercolors in it. You get a swatch card. You get instructions and color card. You get, and then everything else. And then if you get the gift set, you get a watercolor book, a highlight pen, and a double-ended marker. Oh, that is a very tiny watercolor brush. That's kind of cute. And these are more like the weird, awful little chiclets that we've seen from SeamiArt in the past. And so often in these kinds of little sets, they're held together with magnets. These are actually using little bolts, which I think magnets would really be a better way to do this. Well, we'll see. I've got one of the magnet palettes. I had to double check to make sure I had one of the clear acrylic magnet palettes, so we can actually compare them. Because, like, doesn't this look like if you were doing this out in the field or travel, like you'd be very liable to lose that? And that is that. So if I purchased the set, I think I paid $14.40. And yes, we could go back to the order and see exactly what I did. Wow, y'all are so smart compared to me. The 12 basic colors with transparent acrylic box upgrade set. So hopefully that gives you guys something to look forward with today's reviews. I am thinking I'm probably not going to do head-to-head. They are kind of different sets. I do want to review both of them with you guys today. If they seem comparable enough, I'll pit them head-to-head. I'm also going to compare them with my experiences with some of the other SeamiArt products that I've tried. And as always, if my opinions differ from yours and you had a, let's just assume, a good experience with SeamiArt, please let me know down in the comments. If I'm doing something wrong, let me know that as well. But be gentle with me. We're all people here. And, you know, people do make mistakes. They misspeak. They forget things. So let's be kind and gentle here. Also, if you like these watercolors and I don't, it's not a call out. It's not personal. Different art supplies are for different people. And I am kind of looking at this through my own specific lens. I'm a watercolor comic artist and watercolor illustrator. Actually, why don't you take a minute to take a look at some of my art on these social media sites. And if you liked what you saw, it would really mean the world to me if you would check out my comic, 7-Inch Kara. You can read it as a webcomic at 7inchkara.com. So that's the lens I'm looking at watercolor supplies from. I'm looking at it as a watercolor illustrator and comic artist. That's what I like to do. That's what my passion is. And I'm also looking at it as somebody who teaches drawing, comics, watercolor art, and whether or not my students would find these useful. I'm also looking at it through the lens of, are these actually a good value for the price that we paid? Because in this Student Grade Showdown, we have talked about a lot, so many student grade watercolors, and I have some that I really like that I'd like to recommend to you guys. So stick around, make sure you keep watching, because towards the end of the video, I'm actually going to talk about comparable watercolors as well as watercolors that I think you guys might like better, if there happen to be any, because the point of this isn't like, let's rag on art supplies. The point is to help you guys spend your money in a way that is effective for you guys, to help you spend on art supplies that you're going to love, you're going to use, and that are going to make you happy, because I want to help you guys make art a habit. So we are going to start with the professional set. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that this is their professional line of watercolors. Already, I feel like the presentation of this is a bit better than the presentation I saw with the original SeamiArt that I reviewed for you guys. So it comes with some actual stickers that are their stickers, not weird Totoro stickers that are clearly a knockoff. These are SeamiArt stickers. I have 3 of them. They say, enjoy painting. Pretty cheaply manufactured, but that's okay. At least they're theirs. I guess they want me to put their sticker on their box and brand it for them. So sure, why not? It'll actually help me identify the palette, because it is a pretty plain nondescript palette. Inside are our pans. They are labeled, then they are wrapped. I'm gonna pull one out for you guys. So Seems like a single belly band all the way around. It might be adhesive. I may be able to reuse this on the back to help label it. I like seeing that. I like when I can reutilize the packaging. The plastic liner is cheap, but it's not nearly as cheap as the picture looked or I was expecting. It's much heavier than that. So good on them. So far, I'm actually a little impressed. The package was hard to open and this brush is hard to get out. That said, there's a good chance it's not just gonna like explode all over your bag if you're traveling with it. So that's a good sign. So we have a travel brush. It says artist brush. It is a size 8. It actually kind of looks like a silver black velvet. What universe am I existing in right now? That's actually an interesting point. I hope you guys will watch my Art Secret watercolor brush review. Found some really awesome brushes, did some digging, have a new rabbit trail to follow. But if you're looking for affordable and decent artist watercolor brushes, I think that video will be really interesting to you guys. This looks promising. I am so used to getting hot garbage that I'm just excited about this. This looks pretty dang all right. So I am going to just recap it and we're going to take a look at the little travel palette that they sent. So it does look like I went with the gift set. It is kind of hard to believe. I got to check that price one more time. Because I'm like, it's hard to believe that was 14 bucks. And my brain is like, girl, you know that was not 14 bucks. So let me pull it up. It was $18.45. So inside we have our SeamiArt, almost said scratch card. Joseph and I have been talking about lotto tickets. It's Louisiana. It's just a thing. Just roll with it a lot. And I'm not particularly into lotto tickets, but I've had lotto tickets on the brain. So swatch card are, oh my gosh, it's a touch cool. Man, that brings me back to my old alcohol marker review days over on the blog with like touch markers and 2000 markers and fine color markers. Oh, baby's first AliExpress. Oh, this marker looks, we'll find out. That is a permanent marker right there. That is not your standard pigment marker. Here is our highlight pen. It looks exquisitely cheap. So cheap. However, we have a Kara-sized watercolor paper pad. Of course, it is cellulose paper. How do I know? When they advertise the acid-free. Dry and wet painting, cold pressed, 20 sheets. It is so tiny and so cute. It's kind of stupid and I kind of love it. We have our screwdriver and our bolt. Ah, they did it clever. So there is a magnet here and the bolt is a replacement bolt. This is our acrylic package. It still has the little peelies on it because, and I do this with my charms too, I leave the peelies on, A, because some people like their peelies, but also B, because it actually protects it in transit, so it's not going to get all scratched up and gnarly. We will peel this together in a second. Still got the peelies on the back as well. And it's a very cute little magnet closure style. You could use the top as your mixing surface. The travel brush actually looks pretty nice. The chiclets I'm on the fence about, but that's why we're going to swatch today. So we very well might have some art supply redemption on our hands. How exciting would that be? How happy would y'all be for SeamiArt? They can have a little moment. Okay, I had to interrupt that little ASMR moment we were having because the perforations on the page are like almost half the page. Like, I don't really need a little notebook this size. Okay, realistically, I don't really need a little notebook this size, but I keep a mini sketchbook in my purse and I do use it. So I would use this. But these stupid perforations are like a quarter of the page. And they do actually, yeah, you can paint on top of them. You can do what you want. This is a free country. They do kind of like affect how the paint goes down. And also, like, if I really wanted to remove it, I could either have cut it right up here, have done that a million times, and that would have left me with a significant amount of the page. Like, I don't expect them to perforate. Ooh, why is that word so hard to say? A sketchbook this tiny, but it is so tiny and so stupid, and y'all know I'm gonna have to use it. It's so cute. I love it. It's really dumb. Actually, I need to get another reaction. What do you think of that?
It looks like a tiny sketchbook. It looks like the big ones, except like
Except little. Is that not cute?
I'm not really that impressed.
You're not into it? You're also not feeling 100% today. And now the sirens are starting.
I don't think I'd be
okay,
impressed.
what do you think, though, of this perforation line?
I think that takes away a quarter of the page.
Right?
Almost
Why did
close
they do
to
that?
a third of the page.
Why?
Honestly.
I mean, I still love it, and I'm going to use it. But why? I don't know. It is a mystery.
Because I think they literally just
used the same machine.
Yeah.
But they could have just not perforated it.
Yeah,
I would have been happier with that. Well, thank you for your time and your commentary, Mr. Coco. I was trying to do very ASMR aesthetic peelies with you guys, but I've been thwarted. So you see we have a screw on the back. I cannot really remove this easily without removing the screw. So we're gonna put the little screwdriver to the test way sooner than I expected. Also though, very cute little screwdriver. It might work for this because they didn't screw it in particularly strongly. I have mixed feelings about the screwdriver. Like, part of me appreciates them including a little screwdriver because, like, yeah, not everybody's gonna have one. Or like when I was growing up, my mom would not have wanted me borrowing her screwdriver because she wouldn't have seen it again because I'm ADHD and it would have gotten lost in the hoard. So part of me appreciates that, but part of me is also like, I didn't really need a screwdriver. Especially like these little screwdrivers are a very common pack-in for all kinds of things. Ooh, don't love this paper. It is trying to be very adhesive today. Okay, then we gotta see. This is the cover, very shiny. And then this is our little screw. Oh, by the way, if your little chiclets of paint or your dabs of tube paint, whatever, pop out of your palette, you can use just a little bit of gum arabic on a brush, paint it in, it'll glue it back in. Gum arabic is the binder in most watercolors, so it also won't cause any further problems. Or you can just like use a little bit of water and melt the paint back into the pan. Kind of up to you. So this is the tiny little travel brush they included. I think it's pretty nice quality. Oh, it's nicer than I expected. It's got, okay, this miniature amount of wood is beautiful and a little bit funny. It is a size 6, pretty similar to the brush in the other set. We can compare those later on as well, but pretty decent. Cap that back up. Once I put it back in here though, like, yeah, it's hard to get that out, but that's a me problem, not a they problem. Also, okay, it's pretty secure. If this were a live stream, I would be delighted to ask you guys which one y'all would prefer to see first and go with that. Unfortunately, it is not. And I'm not going to do y'all the disservice of pretending like I can hear your response or like I'm reading the comments as I'm recording this, because that y'all are, we're all too old for that. If you're a 1-year-old, you're too old for that shtick. It's only funny when you can make it funny, and I can't make it funny. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick, and I have a hard time picking because they are both super cute, but I am leaning towards oh, see, this is why I would ask you guys, because on the one hand, this is a smaller set, would be quicker to take a look at. On the other hand, this is the professional set. It's supposed to be offering something different. So what I think I will do is I think I will take a look at the professional set first. And the way I'm going to do this is I am going to do, at the very least, my swatching and color mixing before we move on to this one. So if you guys are new here, hi, hello, welcome. I'm so glad to see you. I hope you guys will stick around and consider subscribing, because I review art supplies, especially comic and watercolor supplies, all the time, and I also share a lot of tutorials, so hopefully I've got something you guys will like. But what I usually do is I do a series of tests to help me decide if a palette is half decent at all, who it might be for, and whether or not I want to spend the time even field testing it, because I'm trying to be selective with my time, and I'm trying to only field test watercolor palettes that I think are promising and that I'll actually like. So field tests are usually a completely separate video that hopefully you guys will stick around and check out. But the series of tests that I do is I do swatching, and I look at a lot of different properties when we're swatching. I look at the granulation, I look at how they wash out, I look at the opacity, I look at their liftability. I also do a color mixing test that comes in 2 parts. We have atomic mixing, where we take 2 colors, smash them together to make a secondary color, and we also do optical or glazing, where we do, it's basically you're making plaid, right? You do a line of your primaries, let it dry fully, and then going the other way, you do a line of your primaries, and you see whether or not you can create secondary colors by layering your 2 colors. I find doing both of those tests can be just really informative as to how these will handle as actual watercolors. Then I'd added this year, as part of our student grade showdown, the wet into wet test, because I got burned by Himi, and I'll never forget that. Basically, we take a sheet of paper, we dump a bunch of water on it, we add a bunch of color, and we see what happens. And that can be incredibly telling as to how good watercolors are in terms of wet into wet and diffusion and granulating out into other colors, and whether or not they throw up halos or they resist one another, or, as with many dye-based watercolors, whether or not they just turn to nothing when we add water. So I find this series of tests to be really helpful, and I hope you guys do as well. So let's get started with that, with the professional set. Of course, before we start swatching, we actually have to unwrap these. So I am going to do a live react for the first one, and then unwrap all the rest of them in either time lapse or stop motion, you know, whatever I feel like doing. So generally, they have their names printed on the packaging. This is a little light to see, but it is lemon yellow, and it seems to be adhesive, and it is adhesive all the way around. So inside is our pan. It's like a scant pan, really, because it doesn't even come all the way to the edge. And it seems like the paint, the chiclet of extruded paint, has been held in using a glue dot. So, oh wait, they smell like the MozArt Komorebi watercolors did, but they are not as nice as the Komorebi. But it still reminds me a lot of the Komorebi now that I'm looking at it, and it also kind of reminds me of this palette that Jerry's was selling under their Creative Mark line. Soho line, I'm sorry. Things to think about. So, since this is adhesive, I am actually going to cut the back off and affix it to the back and pop it back in. I'm going to go grab a pair of scissors. There we go. And I do try to utilize, when possible, the packaging as much as I can. Less waste in the landfill. You know, I'm not unaware, though, that ordering art supplies from overseas does generate probably a tremendous amount of waste. That said, even when you order things from Amazon, it seems like increasingly it'll say, you know, ships to you in 3 to 4 days. And I have Prime, by the way. And then it takes a month because they keep delaying it. So I kind of have my own theories that some of the sellers on Amazon may not be as close as they're saying they are. So that was lemon yellow. Let's go ahead and unwrap the rest of these colors. The colors in this set are lemon yellow, Indian red, tree green, black, dark brown, lilac, burnt umber, indigo, red, olive green, yellow ochre, dark purple, mid yellow, dark red, grass green, reddish brown, ink green, peach pink, cherry red, Prussian blue, lake green, Payne's gray, ultramarine, orange, pale purple, and fuchsia. I'm already starting to see some precursors that these might be dye-based. It's hard for me to demonstrate, but on the label side where the name is that I adhered to the backs of these, many of these had like a stripe of color that looked indicative of dye usage. So sometimes with pigment-based watercolors, I'll see that, but that tends to be more chalky. This kind of looked like someone had taken like a stripe of alcohol ink to the back. I didn't want to disrupt the time lapse to show you guys that every time. I only showed you one instance, but it came up several times. So the only way we're really going to know is by swatching, and even then it's still just a supposition. So I am going to be swatching on the same thing I swatch every day, Pinky, the Blick Premier cold pressed watercolor paper. Had to order a new block because I'd run out. Thank you very much to my amazing patrons on Patreon. I use the funds from Patreon to replenish consumables like this, as well as to purchase the supplies that I review here on the channel. We don't have any sponsors here other than the game I am working on with my spouse. And I'll be talking about that one soon when we have a little bit more to show you guys, but I would call that our sponsor since Joseph funds a lot of what I do here on the channel. So giving him some airtime when we have something to show is the very least I can do. Here's how this is going to go down. I have pre-activated these watercolors. We can already see that some of them are starting to really lighten up in color or shift color. That is usually indicative of the inclusion of optical brighteners. Now, with student grade watercolors, we expect some optical brighteners. They're an extender that makes the half pans look more brilliant, and it kind of stretches out the paint and makes it cheaper. You end up using up the paint faster, but it's cheaper for the producer to produce. Usually chalk, things like that can be used as an extender. So with student grade products, we expect that. With professional grade, either to an extent you expect it, but not so much. And usually that is used with pastel colors rather than translucent colors like Indian yellow or ultramarine blue, things of that nature. There might still be some, but you really want to see less of it. So in and of itself, it's not the worst thing, but it is an indication of a cheaper product that may have different performance needs. Not something we really want to see. I also suspect that these may be dye-based, which is another indication of a cheap watercolor and has become my nemesis throughout the student grade showdown. I'm not talking necessarily about lake pigments, which are like Scarlet Lake, for example, which are dyes that have been mordanted out and are referred to as lake pigments. I'm talking about when you make all your colors out of cheaper pigments like that because you're cheap and you don't want to pop for pigments, because with pigments, some of them are going to be more expensive than others. For example, ultramarine blue is going to be more expensive than a common earth pigment like, say, yellow ochre. So it's already kind of concerning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go grab a large soft watercolor brush, and we're using cotton rag paper because I want to be fair. I want to give these the best chance to shine if possible. And this is the paper that I've been using throughout the student grade showdown and that I use with my professional grade watercolor paints. A cotton rag paper is going to be their best chance of really looking good because it's a good quality paper and it's going to reflect the paint's best properties. We are going to be doing a mass tone swatch, that is the full saturation of the color at the top. Then we're going to do a gradiated wash swatch. We're going to see how the water changes how the paints react. We're looking for a nice smooth gradient of color with maybe some granulation for some colors. Maybe some colors don't granulate. Again, different pigments have different granulation and different staining properties. So we actually want to see some difference from paint to paint. If the color just fills the whole area, that is another indication that we are dealing with dye-based, cheaper watercolors. Not necessarily something that you really want to see with professional grade paints. We're going to allow them to dry, and then we're going to try lifting them up. We want to see a variety of opacity, granulation, and liftability because different paints use different pigments with different properties, so they should actually behave differently. If everything lifts the same, that can point to too much optical brighteners used or dye-based watercolors, which might have their place in this world, but I do wish companies would be very honest about doing that instead of trying to trick us. So what I think I'm going to do is we have a nice large sheet of watercolor paper. I only have 26 colors to swatch, so I think I'm going to stack the 2 rows, and then on the other side, I'm going to leave space for our travel SeamiArt palette. I may also have room to do the color mixing on this. We will see. Since cotton rag paper is expensive, I do want to try to condense as many of my tests on the cotton rag as I can. It looks like there's a lot of optical brighteners in these. They shifted color quite a bit when spritzed with water, and the color seems to flood into the wash area. Not like a soft gradient, but the color just fills the water area, pretty similar to what I've seen with other dye utilizing watercolors. And these muddy the water fast and significantly. I am changing the water every 6 colors. The color layout of this palette doesn't really make sense to me chromatically, but you can opt to change the colors as you wish. I also find it surprising that this palette didn't come with a swatch sheet for the color map, considering this is their professional watercolors. And these really look like they're dye-based. That said, I feel like they are an improvement over the other SeamiArt set, but that set was just awful. And I kind of feel like maybe I should challenge myself to try to paint something with a watercolor set I hate. Let me know if you'd like to see me torture myself, maybe as a live stream, down in the comments below. I'm going to allow this to dry before I go back and do the lift, but y'all, it is looking very dye-based up in here. I'm going to move on to doing the color mixing down below since we actually have space, and then we can move on to the travel watercolor set. I'm going to start out by laying down the first row of colors for optical mixing. And it was pretty easy to find our primaries. Everything is pretty bright in the half pans. A color map for this palette would be pretty helpful though. While those dry, I'm going to use the lid of this palette to do our atomic mixing. I found it fairly easy to mix together good secondary color mixes. We were able to get decent oranges, greens, and purples from this set. optical mixing, I noticed that some of the colors reactivate and move rather than glazing. So I guess they're not particularly water safe, and these would not be particularly practical for the kind of watercolor illustration that I like to do. My swatches have had a chance to dry, so now it's time to do the lift test. And the lift test is really simple. I'm going to use this same brush, a cup of clean water. I'm going to gently scrub at the swatches, dab at them with a paper towel, and see how much they lift. As I mentioned earlier, some colors should lift more than others. What we're really looking for is a diversity in terms of these watercolors. Now, what do I think is going to happen? I think they're all going to lift just about the same, because that's kind of the vibe I've been getting from these. Fortunately, as I started to suspect, everything lifts about the same, which is another indicator that these are either full of optical brighteners or they're a dye-based watercolor. Either way, we should see varying degrees of liftability with watercolors that are using various pigments. I'm going to switch focus over to the travel watercolor set for just a little bit so we can fill up the rest of the page, and then we will move on to the wet into wet test, at least for the professional watercolors. Not yet sure about the travel watercolors. Now, I will say that the professional watercolor set has some major downsides, but compared to the SeamiArt watercolors I reviewed earlier, these are leagues better. They're still not great. I can still recommend better watercolors for you guys, but these are an improvement over those. So I guess that means progress. The travel watercolor kit seems to come in a waterproof bag. I didn't mention this earlier, or water resistant at least. It's got kind of a rubbery coating to it. I didn't mention this earlier, but this is the color card. They do seem to be in order of what's on the card. So the colors in this set are lemon yellow, cadmium, medium yellow, cadmium red, alizarin red, cobalt violet, sap green, phthalocyanine green, Prussian blue, ultramarine, ochre, Van Dyke brown, and coal black. On the back, it explains how to start our watercolor brush for the first time, both in Chinese and in English, which I appreciate because it means I don't have to use Google Translate. So, prepare some warm water, knead the brush from tip to bottom, let the brush dispense slightly. Put the brush into the warm water, hold the pen body, do not let the brush tip touch the bottom until the brush dispenses completely. Brush disperses, sorry. Take out the brush from the water, smooth slightly the brush from the bottom to tip. And I'm going to be doing both the travel brushes later on in the video. How to maintain the brush. Do not set back the pen cap to the brush. Clean up the brush after you used it, then wrap the brush with a tissue to absorb extra water. Store the brush at cool, dry, and ventilated place. They don't say anything about recapping it, but. So we are going to, first off, what drew me to this set is the acrylic holder. And I did mention earlier that you can buy these empty. I also mentioned that I have some other acrylic watercolor palettes. So I'll show you guys. So this one is designed to be clipped onto a sketchbook. You guys probably see these all over Etsy. They have little removable quarter pans, which I like, although once they're filled, they're going to be really hard to remove. Sometimes you may see these as wood. Sometimes you may see these with no pans on the inside. They also have magnets on the sides to hold it together. Mine seems like they got damaged at some point, and the magnets themselves there aren't that strong. You would want to clip it. And it's meant to be clipped using like a binder clip. This is supposed to be a mixing surface, but it does have a bit of a texture. It looks like it was laser etched. So I personally would recommend, if you can, anything to kind of smooth this out, maybe even just a thin layer of resin if you happen to have that. So this is one small travel acrylic watercolor palette. Here is the other one I have. It's actually pretty similar to this. This one is designed, I think, to go in a binder because it's got the holes punched out. Very similar to this. It does have the screw at the top. You don't want to screw it too tight because it will chip or break your acrylic after a while. So very similar to this. You could remove this if you wanted to. It will post and magnet to the back. You can use this as a mixing surface. This doesn't have the finished out quarter pans like this one does, but they're just very small, fairly simple little watercolor palettes. If you have the ability to cut acrylic, you can make your own. You could probably 3D print something very similar to this, or you could even CAD files like these up and send them off to Pinocchio with some modifications, which would maybe be an interesting project to do if I use these and I find that there's some areas that I would like to tweak. But you can get these empty on AliExpress for pretty minimal cost. They also have the wooden ones, very similar. It does slightly magnet, but you do want to be kind of careful with it. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to set the accessories aside. We're going to talk about those later on. We're going to swatch on the included swatch sheet first, and then we will take it over to our cotton rag paper. Sort of strangely, the professional set didn't come with a map, but the travel set did. So I'm going to tape the little color map down and we're going to start by swatching on this. I spritz these with water and oh look, we can see some color change going on there as well. So because the swatch colors are next to each other, I'm alternating and giving the initial swatches time to dry. I'm also washing them out a bit so that we can see how they wash out. It's surprising, like I said, that this kit came with a swatch card, but not the professional set. I feel like Seami doesn't quite have their act together. Also, the ochre in this set is weird. There's like no granulation at all. It doesn't look like it has any opacity. This is definitely a dye-based color for sure. Usually, ochres are an indicator color for me. And I want to note that if I dislike the colors in the set, I'm just going to pry them out and use the palette. But so far, these are pretty similar to the SeamiArt Professional palette. I'm going to allow this to dry and we're going to switch over to the cotton rag paper. Next, we're going to swatch on the cotton rag on the same sheet as the other, and these swatch, okay. I think they dried out some after swatching on the swatch card because they're not as saturated and I didn't bother to reactivate them. Comparing the swatches side by side, and I'll show you guys later, I'm not actually sure these two really share a palette. There aren't many colors in common, which is really kind of strange. As I did before, I'm going to let these swatches dry before I do the lift test, and I'm going to go ahead and move on to the color mixing test. And since they recommend using, you guys can't see it, but this is actually the acrylic lid for this. I just removed the bolt to make it easier to film, frankly. I'm going to use this as a mixing surface just to kind of test it out. For color mixing, we're going to start by laying down our grid for optical blending, give that a chance to dry, and then move on to our atomic color mixing. And it's pretty easy to find the primaries in this set as well. So with the atomic mixing, I found that they do mix, but they're far less saturated than the professional lines. As you guys can see, the color mixes are already kind of weaker than what we were able to get with the larger, more quote-unquote professional set. As for optical blending, as you guys will see in a minute, these are not great at that at all. And like the professional watercolors, these lift all about the same, which is not a good sign. said, it was fairly easy to wipe down the acrylic mixing surface and then reattach it to the palette. I do think the mini palette itself is pretty great. It wipes cleanly and it might be a good buy if empty. And it's pretty easy to reassemble, as you guys can see here. You can use a penny to screw it back together. I'm going to talk more about SeamiArt later on, but I wanted to go ahead and compare these two palettes since this is where the review diverges. I'm not going to do a wet into wet set with the little travel palette. I am going to do a wet into wet test with the more professional palette. So I found that, to be fair, I did pre-activate it and the colors were pretty saturated initially. As they dried out though, they did become a little bit more muted. But what I think is really interesting and more telling in terms of the color quality is the mixing down here at the bottom. Since by this point, the little travel palette had had a chance to kind of reabsorb some of the water. So these are both dye-based paints. I think that's all SeamiArt must do. And, you know, if you've watched what I do here, y'all know how I feel about them. If you're new here, I don't really like dye-based pan style watercolors. I'm not a big fan on a personal level of the dye-based liquid watercolors either, but this is more egregious. If you don't really understand how they manage to take something kind of liquidy like dyes often are and turn it into a half pan like this, they basically attach it to a substrate, often something like chalk, and use that as the pigment to turn it into watercolor. It's cheaper than sourcing a bunch of different pigments. So I don't really like that. I've said before, I don't really think there's a space for that, in my opinion, on the watercolor market, but different people are welcome to their opinions. It just doesn't really work for me or suit my needs. If you were going to buy one of these two sets, I do think the professional set is a little bit better. The colors are more saturated. You can see from the color mixes, we're able to get cleaner, less muted color mixes than what we got with the travel palette. But the paints themselves are still not great. And like, sure, you get more of them, but just because you call something professional, it doesn't mean it is professional quality or that it is comparable with brands that we think of as professional. Just to use other Chinese brands, Paul Rubens is an example of a professional watercolor brand that makes excellent watercolors. And I would say these are not comparable with that. That said, I do think just in terms of like it being a watercolor, water medium product, this is a better experience. But I actually think the little palette itself is really cool. I think it stands on its own. You can buy it empty. So that might be a direction to go in. And I think given the price, the palette itself is pretty close to worth the price of admission just on its own. So I don't know, like SeamiArt has seen a little bit of art supply redemption today, but like I still don't like it, and I'm not gonna like turn around and recommend it. I just like it better than my initial experience, which was really bad. So I'm gonna move on to the wet into wet test for this palette here. Since these two palettes are pretty similar, with the professional being the slightly nicer of the two sets, I'm only going to do the wet into wet test with the professional watercolors. So I give them another spritz, and we are going to add a bunch of water to our cotton rag paper to see how these kind of mix and diffuse out. So once activated, the colors are readily available and go down vibrant and saturated. They dry a bit less saturated, but still fairly saturated. The more opaque colors, or colors that should be more opaque, just seem to melt into the rest. Some colors kind of granulate, like the ultramarine blue and one of the reds, but not a whole lot. Okay, so I have grabbed both palettes because we're going to talk about accessories and then we're going to actually talk about comparable palettes. So I think I'm going to start with what's easy, and we're going to talk about the accessories in the professional palette because there's only one accessory with this palette. Honestly, I'm a little surprised because with these kind of cheap watercolor supplies, they love throwing in all this extra stuff, usually pretty dubious quality. I am having trouble getting this out. Like, it's in there. Aha! You know what? I'll use my free screwdriver from the other kit. So we're going to start with the brushes. So both kits come with a small travel brush. Let me also point out that I have not shut this palette yet. I'm going to allow both palettes to dry fully before I put them away. Part of that is to prevent the acrylic from sticking to the paint and smearing it all over the place. Also, though, it is to prevent molding. Okay, so this is the brush that went with the little travel palette. This is the brush that went with the larger palettes. So both of them are travel brushes, old-fashioned style travel brushes. We're not really seeing so many of these anymore. I'm mostly seeing water brushes. This is a size 6. This is a size 8. This one says SeamiArt portable painting brush. This one just says artist brush. Both of them have a breather hole in the top. But what I think is interesting is they're actually somewhat different. This one is much larger. I know it's an 8, but look, it is much longer than this one. It almost is the same size as a full-size watercolor brush. And it doesn't have the wood detailing. So this one has some crimps on the ferrule there. This one doesn't have a delineated ferrule, and they both have sizing. Now, in terms of the brush, it'd be interesting to see if I can get there we go, yeah. So black nylon, look a little bit like silver black velvet, but that is a mix of squirrel and synthetic, and they both have sizing in them. So I'm going to go rinse these off in the sink and remove all the sizing. But before I do that, I am lazy. I will probably just do, this is so tiny though. This is so tiny. I was going to say I'm probably going to do my demonstrations in this ridiculously small watercolor book. But honestly, I'm a little concerned that you guys won't be able to see anything. So I'll try using this. We'll see what we get. So what's kind of interesting is, although these are both nylon, they're both fairly soft. So I'm going to move you guys in. We're going to start with the brush that came with the travel set. If I like this, I will probably poach it from the set. Or just, pry all the little paint chiclets out of the set. And this is in the itty bitty little watercolor book. It's not terrible in its own book. So when I am rinsing the brush out in water, it does wiggle a bit. So that's something you might want to be careful about. The book itself isn't bad. I mean, it's so tiny, it's hard to say, whether it's any good. The brush is kind of surprisingly decent. I kind of like it. It's a softer synthetic, so it's not super stiff and scrubby. It does a pretty good job holding its water, so it's not a very drippy little travel brush. And my only real problem is it does feel a smidgen loose, but not bad. Kind of like that. Oh, and if you are curious about these kind of brushes, when you want to put them away, if you're putting them away for a short period of time, I would really suggest you put it away wet. I know that seems counterintuitive, but if you let it dry, it's going to bush out and it's going to be harder to cap it. If you want to put it away for a longer period of time, or you don't mind the extra labor, you can work some brush soap into it and let it dry in a point. So it's kind of like adding the sizing back into it, and that'll help condition it and protect it, and it'll also make it easier to put the cap on. So kind of is up to you and how you want to work with it. Next we have the brush from the professional SeamiArt set. And I don't know anything. I don't know anything for a fact. I have not done any digging. But if I found out these were Art Secret brushes that had been, you know, relabeled, wouldn't surprise me because they're decent quality brushes. And I mean, I'll have to do a little bit more digging, but I'm pretty sure SeamiArt doesn't like sell brush sets. You know what I mean? But both of the brushes in the two different sets feel comparable in terms of like the bristles themselves. So maybe they're working with the same manufacturer. Usually with these kind of things, different sets will have vastly different pack-ins that handle differently. And like it, to me, it just really starts to feel like you can tell it's not the same. It's not like the same manufacturer manufacturing everything, because there's just not a lot of consistency. At least with the brushes aren't bad. I might poach them. Kind of like them. And if me huffing and puffing in the background is distracting or bothering you, I'm sorry. It's allergy season here in Louisiana, and I am just as susceptible as anybody else. So yeah, the brushes are fine. The tiny little watercolor notebook so far is fine. I might try painting a little scene in here later on after that dries, but that's not bad. So now for where the misgivings start. This thing. Yeah, sorry, I sniffed it because I'm a genius, and it smells so strong and it smells bad. Of course it's going to be permanent. It's a permanent marker. And I'm going to be biased. I'm not going to like it regardless because it is a permanent marker. And something else I've noticed is that sometimes when you do watercolor over alcohol-based markers, which is what I think this is, which is why it's going to be waterproof, sometimes the watercolors can cause them to discolor. You guys may have seen that in some of my swatch tests, and it's something I'm aware of, so I know to look out for that. It doesn't mean anything in particular. But if I'm inking art, I do prefer to use like a black pigment brush pen. Because while those are not always waterproof, they're generally formulated to be alcohol marker and water safe. Try both sides. It seems fine. I am using the professional set for that. Maybe I should use the travel set since that's... Not seeing any reactivation. I don't like the smell, and something I don't like about these kind of markers is they do tend to be fugitive in a weird way, the same way Sharpies discolor greatly over time. They turn really yellow and they eat the paper. That said, if these are dye-based watercolors, they're not going to be light safe anyway. So there's not much you can do about that. Now for the gel pen. I've moved away from gel pens. I just haven't had a lot of good luck with them. So that's why you guys mostly see me use like wash. It seems to be writing. Is this dry? It's dry now. I mean, you get a little bit, but not... It's clearly a cheap white gel pen. It feels very cheap, and it doesn't even really show up as that opaque on the paper. So the pack-ins, these two are not great. This little watercolor book, I would love it so much. Like, the paper isn't bad, but that perforation isn't just not, it eats up so much space on the page. Don't love it. And the brushes are surprisingly good. The other pack-ins for the travel kit are this waterproof bag. It's fine. It's fine. It doesn't feel like, it looks like it would be totally cheap. It's not actually. It's a fabric, like a knit, and then a plasticized outer coating. So it looks like cheap nylon. It's not. It's okay. I mean, it might be also cheap nylon, but it's not like that cheap nylon. It has a very small toggle. This part's cheap. And then we also get the color chart card with instructions on how to care for your brushes. And I told you guys totally different instructions. You can believe who you want. We also got a tiny screwdriver that is honestly a little bit small for that. You could also use a coin. By the way, a coin would be much easier. Or if really a coin would be the way to go. And they also sent a spare screw, which I appreciate because I'm not likely to lose this one, but I appreciate the thought. So the brushes took me by surprise. I like them better than I thought I would. I thought they were going to be, I mean, realistically, like once I opened the packaging and I actually saw them, I was like, they're okay. I was kind of surprised by that, but I thought they were going to be garbage. So I was pleasantly surprised by that. The little mini watercolor book is it's a little bit nicer than I expected. It's kind of similar to the Jerry's Artorama Reflections watercolor notebooks, but with a different cold press texture, so it's not bad. I'm not one for like hardcover sketchbooks because that makes them nice, and then I feel like I can't use them. I buy cheap sketchbooks. But the fact that it is like ridiculously tiny, it just appeals to me. I love it. It's so cute. And I really do like the acrylic palette they included. I don't know why they didn't include a swatch card for the professional. They did include a swatch card for this. And this is pretty similar to some of the other SeamiArt swatch cards that I have completed in the past. Test out the watercolors in the professional set just a little bit, and to play around with the mini book, I'm painting a field of wildflowers. It's a pretty fairly simple little scene that should test out various qualities of the paper and the watercolors themselves. And I found the paper to be pretty decent. I'm pretty sure it is not a cotton rag paper, but it's a decent cellulose watercolor sketchbook. It's fun to paint in. It takes water fairly well. It doesn't seem to buckle all over the place. Maybe if it was a larger size, it might be more challenging to handle, but at this size, it handles these kind of like itty bitty micro sketches just fine. The brush was also pretty dang decent for a synthetic pack-in watercolor brush. I'm definitely going to be taking the brushes out of these sets and using them as part of my regular travel palette. So I would be open to trying the Potentate, because I think that's the label this is under, watercolor books in the future. Let me know if you guys would be interested in that. And I have some tutorials on how to paint fields of wildflowers. If you'd like to paint along, it's a super simple project. As I mentioned earlier, we talked about SeamiArt in the past. So what I want to do is, and here are the swatches. I want to just swatch some of them over to the side. Not all of them, that's not my goal, and that's going to give us a little bit of a basis of comparison. Give these a quick spritz. I'm not even going to bother with the metallics because I really did not like them. And I'll just go ahead and use the brush included with the professional set. As you guys can see, this little set here actually came with a water brush, which is why I was so surprised that I received a much nicer brush. So you guys can see these are smaller chiclets. They're like half the size of the travel palette. Who knows? Maybe I'll end up saying that I found them to be about the same. From these selected swatches, I feel like this handles kind of similarly to the travel palette. Some of the colors are pretty bad, and some are better than I remembered, but I still don't like this palette. The variation with the travel brushes does have me a bit more charmed though. If they'd included those, I might have liked it better. So just off the bat, kind of fresh. I don't think these are as terrible maybe as I did in the first review, but I think in the first review, people had kind of talked them up. I know a lot of people who kind of like SeamiArt watercolors, so I went in with fairly high expectations. I had also just finished the Meiliang Pigments review, so what I'm looking for from student grade watercolors to change drastically. That said, I still don't really like them. I just wanted to caveat, like, I'm not coming into this one as bitter because I expected very little of them. So from these selected swatches, I feel like this handles kind of similarly to the travel palette. Some of the colors are pretty bad and some are better than I remembered, but I still don't like this palette. The variation with the travel brushes does have me a bit more charmed though. I think that's a better value for your money, but I still don't really like SeamiArt watercolors. This didn't like totally redeem it, not by a long shot. It was just kind of like, all right, this is fine. So I did a little digging. I wanted to show you guys a little bit about what I found about SeamiArt. There's not a lot. It's really getting hard to find things on Google these days, as well as OEM, ODM, and OBM manufacturing. We are on the SeamiArt AliExpress site, so you guys can kind of see what they have to offer, what kind of products they've got. And I want to talk about OEM, ODM, and OBM, since I mentioned that a lot. So OEM is Original Equipment Manufacturer. It's an organization that makes devices from component parts bought from other organizations. So they might assemble it. So like when you buy a phone, someone else might manufacture the charger, for example. ODM is private labeling. So it's original design manufacturer. This would be like Equate or Great Value from Walmart. They are buying the product from other brands and then repackaging it with their own labeling. OBM is original brand manufacturer, a company that sells an entire product made by a second company or includes components sourced from a secondary company as its own branded product. This is what we see all the time with superior products. So like the Amy Tangerine palette, for example, would be an OBM product. Probably. It might be an ODM as well, or, you know, because those are superior watercolors in there, and then there's a bunch of other products that might be sourced from all over. But OBM is when you're buying a whole product from somebody and putting your name on it. So another example would be like the Jane Davenport watercolors from a few years ago. Those are the same as the Prima Confections watercolors. So this is kind of a big deal in my opinion because as an art supply reviewer, it makes what I do a lot more difficult. I don't like reviewing duplicates. I think that's a waste of my money and your time. So when I can figure out if something has been white labeled, I will go ahead and let you guys know, or I will just opt not to review it and maybe make a post about it on the community tab because we've only got so much life to live and this video here is already almost 2 hours. If I reviewed every single white label product, a full review, it would be so expensive and it would be so time consuming for everyone. But hopefully I'm helping you guys find products that you like and finding them at the right price, because another thing about this is you can often buy from the original manufacturer and it's often cheaper than buying the relabeled product that is costing more because it's got that brand name. While on the SeamiArt AliExpress site, though, I also found a lot of the products that have been included in the travel palette. So I'm just kind of showing you guys. Like I said, I think these are more of a permanent marker style pen than the kind of pigment-based brush pens that I recommend for you guys. Also, here are the individual pans of the watercolors that are in the professional set that we're taking a look at today. So if you want to refill them or if you want to replace them, they're $1.99 each, which, yeah, that's about what I paid for them. Maybe there's like a slight discount in there. So usually when you're buying open stock, it's much more expensive because you're buying the individual product to replace it rather than the set, because they're saving money by selling you the bulk of the product. But I feel like my swatches do not reflect what their swatches are showing here, and I just wanted to share that with you guys because often AliExpress will change listings will go down, different vendors will offer different things, and I can't always link the things that I'm seeing for you guys because that changes over time. I do try to when I can, but I wanted to show you guys so you could experience what I'm experiencing here in the moment with the SeamiArt shop on AliExpress. And you guys can see they also have wholesale offering. So that was another thing that we were talking about earlier with the ODM, OEM, and OBM. There's also wholesale where you could buy a bunch of them and then repackage them. So let's say I'm an art influencer and I want to start selling watercolors. This would be a very cheap way for me to use my good name to sell a bunch of very inexpensive watercolors at a markup. Am I accusing anyone of doing that? Absolutely not. But you do want to kind of see where the sources are and make sure that you're happy with the quality of the supplies that you're getting. So this is the SeamiArt Facebook page, I believe. This is where I found a lot of my information in my original SeamiArt review about this brand, and I collected all that during Hurricane Ida, so I didn't really have the ability to show you guys or capture it for you, but here they are demonstrating the products and why you might be interested in them. They've also got a summer sale going on from last year, so you can see some of the products that we're talking about today being demonstrated right here. And I love how they're not going to do a full swatch for it. They're just going to do the cutesy little flower things that are they're very cute, but it's very difficult to tell the quality of the paints from those swatches. I have reviewed a lot of student grade watercolors, and rather than go and pull them all out, I'm going to include clips of watercolors that I think are comparable, as well as watercolors that I think are going to be a better pick than this. Keep in mind, I am going to do a big ranked tier list at the end of the student grade showdown, but I find that this is the section that ends up taking forever in my reviews, so I'm trying to cut it down while still being helpful. So watercolors that I have reviewed that I think are a similar value to this palette or are just very similar would primarily be dye-based watercolors, and I have reviewed a lot of really garbagey dye-based watercolors like the XileyW watercolors. I've also reviewed some that I was kind of like, okay, it's not for me, but it's not the worst. So I think these are kind of comparable to the Meeden watercolors that I reviewed. Meeden is another white label company, so they have a bunch of different sets. I am specifically referring to the ones that I reviewed as part of the student grade showdown and the clip that I'm going to include here. These might be a bit better than the professional Georgione watercolors. That was another head-to-head review where I compared their studio set, which was like garbage chalk cakes of watercolor, against their professional set, which was only a little bitty bit better. And they're also pretty similar to Artibox, which are dye-based watercolors that come from Singapore. So the XileyW watercolors might be some of the worst watercolors I have reviewed in the student grade showdown. They look a lot like the packaging for the Faber-Castell watercolors, which I actually haven't reviewed yet. They are entirely dye-based and they are just awful. I would really recommend you skip these. These are terrible. They're very disappointing. They're dye-based, but they have very, very little color to offer. There's been some dye-based watercolors that I've reviewed since that have a little bit more going on. There's just really nothing to recommend about these watercolors. If you want to laugh at my expense, which you're welcome to do so, you can check out the full review. I'll have it linked in the description for you guys, but just please don't buy these. Do yourself a favor and don't buy these. I hated them so much. Next are the original SeamiArt watercolors, or at least the first ones that I reviewed here on the channel. This is the big 90 color set where half of them are neons and metallics and pearlescents. And this set was just really pretty disappointing. Originally, I was kind of charmed by the box, and I had just come from doing the Meiliang Pigments, so I had high hopes. You guys can see there were a bunch of stickers in there that just didn't have anything to do with anything. I swatched on both their swatch cards and my cotton rag paper, and I really didn't like this set. I felt like there were no redeeming qualities to this set. So that's kind of like a plus sign for both of the sets that we're taking a look at today. I do think there are redeeming qualities to both of those sets. Now, whether or not they're worth your money or, SeamiArt did something right for once, that's up to you. But I personally really cannot recommend this particular set. I know there are artists who can do stuff with it. That was not me. This is the first of the Himi/Mia reviews that I did. I had really high hopes for this one. It looked really cute. It swatched really well. Like the unboxing swatch went really well. And then when I did the field test for this, it totally fell apart. It was really difficult to layer, to mix colors, to blend colors. The colors didn't handle very well wet into wet, but this is the set that inspired me to start doing the wet into wet test that has become a staple in all of my student grade watercolors. And it's going to be a staple in my professional grade watercolor reviews as well, because that wet into wet test can reveal so many things about watercolors. But you can see how they swatch very promising. They're very similar to the Meiliang Pigments, which I really liked. They're fairly similar to the Superior. It was only in handling, only in the field test, where their true nature was disappointingly revealed. In this student grade showdown, I've run into a lot of dye-based watercolors. The Meeden watercolors, though, were the best performing of the dye-based hat pans that I ran into. I can't say that I particularly like them for the kind of art that I like to make, but I could see why people might like them. They're very quick to activate. They are very saturated. So if you're doing like florals, or if you're doing, and I mean loose florals, or if you're doing brush calligraphy or anything that's not going to require a lot of blending and very little layering, these might be excellent. Also, they are gorgeous while they're still wet, but they dry less impressive. So if all you're doing is recording little snippets for like TikTok or Instagram and you don't ever plan on showing the watercolors fully dry, this might be an okay set for you that isn't going to cost a whole lot of money. Now, I've used other Meeden products in the past, and I'm fairly happy with their quality. So this Georgione palette is part of a two-part review where I compared their studio palette against their professional palette, and it was another very dye-based, very cheap, it came from AliExpress palette that, even though professional's in the name, it really doesn't handle the way I would want or expect professional grade watercolors to handle. So I really get another one I really cannot and do not recommend, but I thought I'd share it with you guys because I am comparing the two SeamiArt palettes that we're talking about today to all of these watercolors, and I wanted you guys to have kind of a basis for comparison. The Artibox watercolors are from Singapore, and I was intrigued because I've never reviewed any art supplies from Singapore. Unfortunately, these are very dye-based. They're very inexpensive. The palette itself is probably the nicest part of this set, and it's another one that I just really cannot recommend. There are better sets out there, and I am happy to recommend those better sets to you guys and see you guys happy, but the Artibox set is not it. So what I think might be a better alternative to this set, if you're looking for something similar price range, similar size, but you don't want the dye-based watercolors, would be the MozArt Komorebi watercolors. I reviewed those a long time ago, and I actually really like them. They do smell kind of funny though, and they're more similar to a Gensai style watercolor than a Western style watercolor, but I think you guys might enjoy them. I also think Paul Rubens half pans, in terms of a professional, the Paul Rubens are a professional grade. Their student grade is the Meiliang Pigments or the AON. I think for the price, you can probably get the 24 half pan Paul Rubens set. I know for sure though you can get the Meiliang Pigment set, which is their student grade. I'm going to include clips for both, but really I would say, if you're say this all the time, oh my gosh, we all know who's going to win the student grade showdown. the Meiliang Pigments and the Paul Rubens are probably going to be a better fit. They're probably going to make you happier. And considering these aren't like super common watercolors, if you really want these, you kind of have to seek them out. You know, you're going to have to do that for the Paul Rubens too. You can get them on AliExpress, you can get them on Amazon. So I would recommend you get the Paul Rubens or the Meiliang Pigments if you're looking for something better than this, but still kind of in that ballpark. So speaking of better sets, this is the MozArt Komorebi set. So this is a fairly inexpensive, I think it's 40 or 45, sorry, I can't count, pan set, full pan set, and these handle a lot like Gensai watercolors, so they're very quick to activate, they're very saturated, they're very easy to work with as well. I have used the heck out of this set since I bought it. Now this is an older review, it doesn't look nearly as good as my current reviews, but this is a really nice reminder of how much I have learned about recording and recording art supplies over the years, so go me. But if you search my channel for Komorebi, you guys will see a lot of examples of me using this palette. I actually recommend this palette. I think it's a fun little palette to use. The pans are removable, so you can change them up or you can magnet them into something else. There is a little bit of a smell to these. I think it's the binder. I think they're using a similar binder to what Gensai style watercolors use. Now, Paul Rubens has set the gold standard here on the channel. I really like Paul Rubens products. This is not technically a student grade product, but it is it's priced in that range. So they're very affordable little half pans, very easy to use, quick to activate, very saturated, and they handle like watercolors are supposed to. They're a little bit more finely milled than some Western style watercolors. I've noticed that Asian watercolors tend to be just a little bit more finely milled than their Western counterparts. That's not a problem, it's just an observation, but they do granulate and they handle beautifully. And I have used them in tubes, I have used them in half pans, I have used them in their beautiful little bijou travel palette. So if you're interested in some affordable watercolors that handle really well, I hope you guys will check out my Paul Rubens and my Meiliang pigment reviews, because I think you guys might find what you're looking for there. I feel like it wouldn't be a student grade showdown review without me mentioning the Meiliang Pigments palette. So this is a student grade palette from the company that produces Paul Rubens. I've reviewed several of their palettes, the O-Win and the AOWin palette as well. Really like all of them. The Meiliang Pigments palette is a very affordable student grade palette that handles really well. It has bright saturated color, and the real beauty of this little palette became apparent, not a palette to me, during the field test. So I'm going to share a little segment of the field test with you guys in just a moment, but I feel like you get a really good range of colors. The neutrals are not weird in the way that many of the student grade showdown neutrals have been weird. It's just a good palette, and it's pretty affordably priced, especially on Amazon, but you can also find it on AliExpress. So here's a snippet from the field test. I have the full review here on the channel. You guys can check it out. And when it comes to my field test, I put them through all the paces. I paint a full watercolor illustration on Stonehenge aqua cotton rag paper. What I loved about these paints is that they handled like their professional grade counterparts. Easy to blend, easy to do washes, easy to do gradient, easy to do layering, easy to mix colors, whether through optical blending or atomic blending. They just handled really well. And I kept forgetting that this was a student grade set while I was doing this field test, which is some of the highest praise I can give a student grade watercolor palette. So if you're looking for a great affordable student grade palette, this would be my recommendation for you. This little travel palette is a weirdo because it's got some features that I really like, but the paints inside are not so good. So a similar value, kind of comparable to this set. First off, I have reviewed other little SeamiArt palettes. So obviously those are going to be comparable. I'll include them, don't worry. The Amy Tangerine palette that I reviewed, which kind of falls in my influencer range of reviews as well, those are white labeled superior watercolors. same as the Shapiro Farben. I think these are fairly similar to that palette. And I mean this specifically as a travel palette. That palette is bigger than I would have liked, but it has some neat features that some people might enjoy. I would not overpay for it. I'd be careful not to pay too much for it because the build quality is just not that great. This actually has better build quality than that. I like the paints in that palette a little bit better than the paints in this palette, but I like the build quality of this palette better than that palette. I like the brush better in this palette than in that palette, but I like their other pack-ins better than this thing, this alcohol marker here. So it's kind of a give and take. I am so biased by this tiny, adorable, cute little watercolor book though. And none of the kits that I've reviewed, I think, have included one of these. So points to SeamiArt. I might give them some redemption as a company in the form of going back later on and looking at their brushes and their papers, because that might be where their sweet spot is and not their watercolors, in my opinion. The Sakura Koi 12 color palette, and I have like a really old review. I used to really like it. I used it all the time, and then I quit buying the 12 color and started buying the 24 because if you catch the 24 on sale, they're similar price points, and I used to use them for my quickfire convention watercolor commissions. So I would say similar value. I like the Sakura Koi a bit better though. And the Himi travel palette, that I did not like the paints that much, and I did not like the format of the travel palette that much. I like the format of this palette so much more, but I might like the Himi paints a little bit more than the SeamiArt paints. So I have reviewed two other SeamiArt watercolor palettes, two mini palettes, this pastel palette and the skin tone palette. All very dye-based. I actually found that they handled worse than the Prima Marketing neutrals and pastel confections, something like that, palettes. While those are fairly inexpensive palettes, they're actually white labeled from Mungyo, and they handle decently well. These are not that. Those are better than these. If you want a pastel palette, don't get this, maybe get that. I really did not like either of these palettes. I just thought they were weird. The best part of these palettes were the tins that they came into, and it's only a matter of time before I gut them and actually make use of the palettes. So, would not recommend these, as cute as they are in pictures. This is the Amy Tangerine palette. These are actually superior watercolors inside here in an interesting travel style. This was actually one of the sets that kind of started my art influencer series that I am going to be picking up soon. I'm working on the research for it. I find it to be a little bit overpriced for what it is. The paints are fine. You can get them in cheaper formats, or you can get them in larger palettes for about the same price. The colors are cute and very perky, but they don't really lend themselves to mixing particularly well. This is kind of like a good set if you like to travel and you do brush calligraphy or hand lettering, or if you do like really loose florals or really loose watercolor sketches, but you don't paint people and you don't paint animals. There is another palette with a different colorway. I have not reviewed it. I assume it is the same superior paints that I've reviewed like a dozen times. I would just buy them from the source unless you want this palette for itself, but there are better travel watercolor palettes out there. Speaking of, so this is the Sakura Koi palette. It's not the 12 color palette like we talked about, but I used this kind of palette for almost a decade when I was a convention commission artist, and I was doing a lot of quick fire watercolor commissions over the years. Now, is this the highest quality watercolor palette out there? Absolutely not. It is very student grade, but it is also very accessible, fairly affordable. You can find it anywhere from Michael's to probably your local brick and mortar. You can buy refills for it, but they can be a little bit harder to find. If you live in Japan, they're easier to find. Sorry, us US folks, we're just out of luck. And then a better value, in my opinion, would just be the empty acrylic palette itself. SeamiArt sells those. You can also find the empty acrylic palettes all over AliExpress, also on Etsy. They're overpriced on Etsy because they're just reselling the AliExpress one. They're the same ones is what I'm trying to say. I showed you guys those earlier. I don't have a review of them yet because I haven't put them through their full paces, but I think that would be a better value, because what I like about this for the most part is the palette, the brush, which is surprisingly good, and the little book. And to be fair, my other two little mini palettes don't have a brush holder in them. This does. That's pretty neat. So there's pros and cons. It's going to be a, what do you value? What do you need? I am going to pry these little chiclets out. I may even do that in this video. We will see. I'm not sure what I'm going to refill it with yet, though. The Superior watercolor watch that I have to include a clip for because I don't know where it is, but it is here. It's just a better weird little travel palette. Now, it's not a good fit for everyone. There are some people, if you have like hand or arm tremors, it may not work so well for you. If you like to spread out more, it may not work so well for you. But I hope you guys will check out the clip and see for yourself if it works, if it seems like it's something that you might like. I think it's really neat. I really like it, but it does have its limitations, and I do want to caveat that. But I think paint quality-wise, it's better than these here. And then the Paul Rubens Travel Watercolor Palette, the little bejeweled bijou box, so pretty. I'm just a sucker for those. Also, I like Paul Rubens paints, so I think the quality of the paint and the box itself is gorgeous. So if you like aesthetic art supplies, that is going to be a better fit. Although, let's be real, clear acrylic as a child of the 90s, I love it. I'm a sucker for it. Let's bring back transparent stuff again. I'm here for it. I had the inflatable sofa. I had the jelly purses that you could see through. I had the clear purple Game Boy Color. Like, I love me some transparent stuff. So, like, I'm here for it. Bring it back. Also, you can very, 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 very easily make your own mini palette out of like a mint tin, an Altoids tin. You can buy these empty on Amazon too. Pretty cheap. These have Paul Rubens watercolors in them because we did this in Art Squad. It was a very easy project. I really enjoyed doing it with Art Squad. And you can mix almost anything you want to paint with these. So I have a short on how to do this. And I can share that with you guys, and I can share there's like a bit of a presentation that I made for the Art Squad. I can share that over on my Patreon for my patrons, but this is super simple. It is not worth its own big tutorial video, but this, especially if you have a friend that you can go halvesies with and y'all can split the cost of the tubes, because listen, y'all, we didn't even get, they were the 5 milliliter tubes. They weren't even the big tubes. And look, this isn't a big old full fill by any means. They're all pretty scant, but we got 13 people, at least 13 people. We had 9, then 2 more showed up, and then me. That's 13, right? Maybe, no, that's 12. Okay, but we got 12 people situated with these from just the 5 milliliter tubes. So like you could go split it with 2 friends and all of y'all would end up with full half pans and probably some extra for refills. So that is also an option that you can go with. It is finally time to talk about the pros and cons, and we're going to start with the professional set because it is the big brother. It should be able to handle it. So for the pros, I like the brush in this set. I'm very surprised by that. I like it more than I thought I would, and I like it enough that I will probably try some other SeamiArt watercolor brushes to see if it's like a one-off or if, hey, maybe I like SeamiArt watercolor brushes. This has been a good year for watercolor brushes with me. I also like this palette better than that big 90-something color set, but it's still not great. So that brings us to the cons. I still really don't like SeamiArt watercolors. They are dye-based and full of optical brighteners. That is not a good fit for me and the kind of art that I like to make. And there are just so many better student-grade, comparably priced watercolor sets out there that I don't know what they're doing, and I don't really know why they're doing it. So what about the pros and cons of the little brother, the travel watercolor set? Let's start on a positive note. I love the acrylic palette. It's just really neat, very simple, very clear, and there's room for 3 more colors. I am going to pry those chiclets out, whether I do it on camera or not. I still haven't decided, but that is a thing that is going to happen. I also really like the brush a lot, and it fits in the palette, which So good. I love it. Now keep in mind, this was a kit. So I also really like the tiny, ridiculous mini watercolor book. I am a sucker. What can I say? Paper's not bad. So between the little mini watercolor books and the brushes, there might be some reason for me to go back to SeamiArt, just not for their paints. So what did I not like? This thing here that I think they included it to be an inking pen, but it's a permanent marker. I just no, and no. Their highlighter pen, the white gel pen, is also a joke. If you like white gel pens, the Uni Signo is one of my favorites. It used to be like my go-to for years and years and years and years and years. I just find that gel pens clog on me super quick, so I don't even mess with them anymore. I mostly use like white gouache instead, but that is a personal preference, and I know I'm always amazed when I see people go over their watercolor art with a white gel pen, because I cannot. I have tried. It will not even do anything, and this is like not a great example of using it for that. Something else I don't like is the perforations. You see how deep, no you don't, let me fix that. You see how deep into the image that goes? There's no, I mean, I know why, the machinery they have, but like I'd rather no perforations on this thing, because like if you tore it out anyway, it's not even business card size then. So like, why don't we like just not pretend? They also have other mini books and they don't have perforations that are like Shigami covered cute little mini books, and a friend of mine made me a bunch and I need to use those, but they're so nice and they're handmade that it's like that, like it's perfect and I'm going to ruin it feeling. And that's stupid because I know my friend would want me to use them, but that's why I don't buy nice things. Well, I don't buy nice sketchbooks. I buy nice paints and I buy terrible sketchbooks, but their paper might be worth revisiting, but I don't like those perforations. And then the final con is the paints themselves. I really don't like SeamiArt paint. I'm sorry if you do. It's not a call out to you. In fact, we're about to talk about who I think these might be for, and if you are someone that these are for, sound off in the comments. All right, so who are these for? Let's start with the professional set. I feel like these might be okay for hand letterers who don't need light fast watercolors or archival colors. They're practicing or they're doing work for reproduction, and they would prefer to work with half pans rather than markers or liquid watercolor. Like maybe they travel a lot and they need something that packs up very neatly and doesn't contain, you know, a bunch of glass. The colors activate readily. There isn't a lot of granulation to the colors themselves, and they bleed and blend together quickly and easily, which might make them ideal for brush calligraphy. A card maker who wants the same parameters might also like these. As for the travel set, I am a sucker for clear acrylic, but I also think this could be a great option for palettes, just as a whole, like moving away from metal to use clear acrylic. That said, that is more plastic in the environment. I'm not really a fan of that, and the metal is probably easier to repurpose or recycle, so it's kind of a toss-up. I'm probably just like totally distracted by the clear acrylic, and you know, I gotta admit that. So the acrylic doesn't seem to stain, and it's very easy to wipe clean. The magnets do a good job, and the bolts are probably fairly easy to replace with something if they happen to be lost or get lost, but they did send us an extra one that I'm going to probably promptly lose, or it's going to go live in my tool chest and I'll never be able to find it. That said, the paints themselves are very and I'm going to pry those chiclets out so I can utilize the palette itself. I could see many different artists appreciating such a compact little palette, but find it challenging to recommend the paints, particularly when the professional palette might better suit the audience that would like these paints better. For me, it is kind of challenging to give a verdict because I still don't like the paints. They're a little bit better than my first experience, but not good enough for me to recommend them to almost anybody I know. That's all I got for that. That said, the brushes, the acrylic palette, and the mini book all have me intrigued, and I like those better. So I'm not won over with the paints. I'm not excited about the paints. I don't even know if I'm going to field test the paints because they are very obviously not for me, or if I do field test them, it's going to be in a way that isn't as big as I normally do, because I think in kind of like a limited, because I use the professional paints, heavy air quotes, in this little thing, and they look fine. So I think in like a limited application like the ones I mentioned above, they might be a good fit and you might be very satisfied with them. But to paint a comic page or a larger illustration that utilizes a lot of layers and a lot of glazes and a lot of granulation, I don't really think these are a good fit. So they're not for me, is probably the kindest thing that I can say. So, did SeamiArt find redemption in your heart? Are you ready to forgive them? Or are you like me and, okay, these palettes are better than the other SeamiArt palette that I took a look at a while back, but they're still not the quality that I would like to see, especially for a palette that's calling itself their professional grade palette. There's not really anything professional about it. That doesn't mean these palettes are just totally without their virtues. This palette came with a very nice travel brush. The travel kit came with a really nice mini watercolored sketchbook, which is just so cute. I am a sucker for either oversized things or miniature things. So let me look at that. It's so cute. And it also came with a really nice acrylic palette. It's just a shame that the paints inside are still SeamiArt watercolors and not very good. So today we swatched both sets, which I've got right here. Now, to refresh your memory, this side is the professional and this side is the travel palette. Sorry, the sun decided to, it was super cloudy and no one was, what do you call it? Blowering? I call it a waste of energy and time. When you take an air blower and you blow the leaves or the glass clippings off the street. What is that? What do y'all call that? Anyway, nobody was doing that when I first came out. And then of course, when I started to record. So if it's annoying, I'm sorry. I went and grabbed the mic. Hopefully not too bad. Anyway, though, this side is the travel palette. I did find the professional palette to be a bit more saturated than the travel palette, but I think these are still dye-based watercolors. I think they're still full of optical brighteners. And while I was able to atomically mix, that's down at the bottom, some nice secondary colors, glazing is still not really a strong point for these watercolors. And as with the wet into wet test, even though they were very, very saturated when I first added them, as they dried, they became really dull and desaturated and just kind of blown out, which, as someone who loves wet into wet watercolor techniques and utilizes that to bring in some beautiful chaos into my work, I can't work with watercolors that are not going to cooperate with me. We also talked about some comparable watercolors, including the Meeden watercolors, as well as some professional and student grade watercolors, both travel and at home, that you guys might like better. So hopefully today's, while it was an unboxing swatch, it was not, to me, they didn't see the redemption I think we were all hoping that they would see. I hope you guys did find it to be helpful, useful, and informative, and I hope you guys enjoyed it, because I enjoyed hanging out with you guys today. If you haven't yet and you like what I do, it would really mean the world to me if you click the subscribe button and hit the bell notification to let YouTube know that you would like to see more from me. I try to update twice a week on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and I've always got new shorts coming out so you guys can see what I'm working on. And if you like what I do and you want to help me continue to do it, you can join me at Patreon at patreon.com/NatoSoup. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. I look forward to seeing you guys again soon with another art supply review or tutorial. And I hope I was able to share something that was helpful, useful, and informative that will help you spend or save your money so that you can buy the art supplies that are the best fit for you. Bye, guys!